Marcus Chen stepped off the transport shuttle onto the dusty platform of Kepler Station's slave market. The artificial gravity felt heavy under his boots as he walked through the crowded bazaar. Alien merchants called out prices in a dozen different languages, while potential buyers examined their living merchandise. Marcus hated this place. The smell of unwashed bodies and fear hung in the recycled air like a toxic cloud. But his mining operation on Proxima needed workers, and after the last rebellion wiped out half his crew, he had little choice. The company demanded results, and results required labor. The human colonies had been part of the Galactic Trade Federation for 50 years now. Earth had joined eagerly, desperate for the advanced technology and resources that membership provided. The price of admission was simple: follow Federation law, pay Federation taxes, and don't ask too many questions about how business gets done. Marcus walked past cages filled with various species. Tall, blue-skinned Zentari stood in groups, their large eyes watching everything with intelligence. Small, furry Korax huddled together, chattering nervously in their high-pitched voices. Massive Thrakari, built like walking mountains, sat silently in reinforced cells designed to hold their immense strength. Each species had been conquered by the Federation at some point in the past 3 centuries. Their worlds were now protectorates, their people voluntary workers in the galactic economy. The official documents never used the word slave, but everyone knew what it really meant. Looking for something specific? Human? Marcus turned to see a Vorthon merchant approaching. The reptilian alien's scales gleamed with expensive oils, and his forked tongue flicked out to taste the air. 3 eyes focused on Marcus while the 4th watched for other customers. "I need miners," Marcus said. "Strong, intelligent, won't cause trouble." "Ah, yes. Mining is dangerous work. You'll want Corellians." The Vorthon led him toward a section Marcus hadn't noticed before. Very rare, very expensive, but worth every credit. Marcus stopped when he saw them. The Corellians looked almost human at first glance. 2 arms, 2 legs, similar height and build. But their skin had a subtle silver sheen, and their hair moved like it was underwater even in the still air. Most striking were their eyes, deep purple that seemed to hold starlight. "They're beautiful," Marcus said without thinking. "Beautiful and useful," the Vorthon agreed. "Corellians can work in any environment. They need very little food or water. They live for centuries, so they're a long-term investment. Most importantly, they're genetically incapable of violence. Perfect workers." Marcus examined the group more carefully. There were maybe 20 of them, all with the same haunted expression he'd seen in every slave market. But something was different about these beings. They stood with a dignity that hadn't been broken despite their circumstances. One female caught his attention. She was taller than the others, with silver hair that cascaded down her back. When their eyes met, Marcus felt something he couldn't explain. Not attraction exactly, but a connection, like she was trying to tell him something without words. "That one," he pointed to her. "What's her story?" The Vorthon's tongue flicked out again. "Ah, you have good taste. That's Lyra. Former scientist from their homeworld before the liberation. Very intelligent. Speaks several languages, including standard human. She'd make an excellent supervisor for your operation." "How much? For her?" 50,000 credits, Marcus whistled. That was half his budget for the entire operation. But something about the way Lyra looked at him made him nod. "I'll take her." The transaction took an hour to complete. Marcus had to provide proof of adequate housing, nutrition schedules, and work parameters. The Federation was very strict about the proper treatment of voluntary workers. On paper, it all looked humane. As the ownership transfer was finalized, Marcus found himself standing next to Lyra, while the Vorthon prepared the neural control collar that all voluntary workers wore. The device would prevent her from leaving his property and ensure compliance with direct orders. "This will only take a moment," the Vorthon said, approaching with the collar. "Just a small implant to interface with her nervous system. Completely painless." As the merchant reached for Lyra's neck, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was melodic like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, but her words made Marcus's blood freeze. "Please," she said in perfect standard human, "don't let him put that thing on me. I have something to tell you, something about your people that you need to know." The Vorthon hesitated. "Ignore her. They all try to delay the process." "It's natural," but Marcus raised his hand. Wait. He looked into Lyra's purple eyes and saw something that made him step back. Not fear or desperation, but urgency, like she was carrying a message that could change everything. What do you want to tell me? He asked. Lyra glanced at the Vorthan, then leaned closer to Marcus. Her voice dropped to a whisper that only he could hear. The Federation has been lying to humanity for 50 years. Your people aren't members. You're being prepared for harvest. The same way my people were. The same way every species in this market was. In 10 years, maybe 15, they'll come for Earth. And when they do, every human will end up in chains. Marcus felt the world shift around him. The Vorthan was saying something about delayed stress responses and the need to complete the collaring process quickly. Other merchants were calling out to new customers. The normal chaos of the slave market continued around them, but all Marcus could hear was the echo of Lyra's words. Harvest, chains, lies. You're wrong, he said, but his voice sounded hollow even to himself. Look around you, Lyra whispered. Every species here thought they were special partners with the Federation. Right up until the day the ships came. I was there when they took my world. I saw the same promises they made to you, the same lies. The Vorthan was getting impatient. Human, we need to complete this process. The collar ensures she won't run away or cause problems. It's for everyone's safety. Marcus stared at the device in the merchant's clawed hands. He thought about his mining operation, his quotas, his place in the galactic economy, everything he'd worked for since humanity joined the Federation. Then he looked at Lyra again. At her dignity despite her circumstances. At the intelligence in her eyes that no collar could ever truly contain. No, he said suddenly. I don't want the collar. The Vorthan's 3 visible eyes widened. But it's required for all voluntary workers. Federation law clearly states, then I'm not buying a voluntary worker, Marcus interrupted. I'm hiring a consultant. The paperwork for hiring a consultant instead of buying a voluntary worker took 3 more hours. The Vorthan merchant was clearly frustrated, but Federation law allowed for such arrangements under specific circumstances. Marcus had to post a massive security bond and agree to personal responsibility for Lyra's actions. During the process, Lyra sat quietly on a bench outside the merchant's office. Marcus watched her through the transparent aluminum window as he signed document after document. She didn't fidget or look around nervously like most freed slaves did. Instead, she seemed to be thinking deeply about something. When they finally left Kepler Station together, Marcus felt like he was making the biggest mistake of his life. 50,000 credits for a consultant he didn't even know he could trust. His company would demand explanations he didn't have. The shuttle ride to his mining operation on Proxima Beta took 2 days. Marcus had expected awkward silence or grateful chatter from Lyra. Instead, she spent the journey asking him questions. How long has humanity been part of the Federation? She asked on the first day. 53 years, Marcus replied. Why? What percentage of human military forces are currently deployed off-world on Federation missions? Marcus frowned. That was an oddly specific question. I don't know exactly. Maybe 60%? The Federation keeps us busy protecting trade routes and maintaining peace on various worlds. Lyra nodded like this confirmed something she already suspected. And how many humans are currently serving in Federation administrative positions? What do you mean? I mean humans in positions of real authority within the Federation government. Not liaison positions or advisory roles. Actual decision-making power. Marcus thought about it. He realized he couldn't name a single human who held a major position in the Federation hierarchy. Ambassador Chen was Earth's representative to the Federation Council, but she didn't actually vote on anything. Director Williams ran the Human Integration Office, but he reported to a Vorthan supervisor. I'm not sure, he admitted. 0, Lyra said quietly. The answer is 0. Just like it was 0 for my people, and the Centauri, and the Orcs, and every other species you saw in that market. The rest of the journey passed in uncomfortable silence. Proxima Beta was a harsh world of red rocks and thin atmosphere. Marcus's mining operation consisted of a dozen prefabricated buildings clustered around 3 deep shaft mines. The work was dangerous and the conditions were brutal, but the rare earth metals they extracted were worth a fortune to the Federation. Marcus's crew consisted of 15 humans and about 40 various aliens. Most of the aliens wore neural collars, but a few were free workers earning wages to send home to their families. The humans served as supervisors and equipment operators. When Marcus arrived with Lyra, the reaction was immediate and negative. "Boss, you can't bring an uncollared alien into the compound," said Jake Morrison, Marcus's head of security. "Regulations are crystal clear about that." "She's not a slave," Marcus explained. "She's a consultant. I hired her to help improve our mining efficiency." Jake looked skeptical. "Consultant in what? She's Corellian, right? They're supposed to be pacifists. What could she possibly know about mining?" Before Marcus could answer, Lyra spoke up. "Your third shaft is producing at only 60% of capacity because you're hitting metamorphic intrusions in the rock face. The seismic data shows clear signs of a crystal vein about 50 meters to the northeast that would yield 3 times your current output." The compound fell silent. Jake's mouth dropped open. "How could you possibly know that?" asked Dr. Sarah Kim, the operations geologist. "Because my people spent 10,000 years mining the same kinds of deposits on our homeworld," Lyra replied calmly. "Before the Federation arrived to help us find better opportunities elsewhere." Dr. Kim pulled out her tablet and began checking the seismic surveys. After a few minutes, she looked up with amazement. "She's right. There is an anomaly in that exact location. We dismissed it as sensor error." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If Lyra was right about the mining deposits, what else might she be right about? That evening, Marcus invited Lyra to his private quarters for dinner. His living space was Spartan but comfortable. A main room, small kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom. Luxury compared to the dormitory-style housing where the workers lived. "You said the Federation was preparing to harvest humanity." Marcus began without preamble. "What exactly does that mean?" Lyra sat across from him at his small dining table. She had eaten very little of the meal he'd prepared, picking at the food like someone who wasn't used to eating regular meals. "It's a process," she said. "It takes decades to complete properly. First, they make contact with a species that shows promise. They offer technology, resources, membership in their galactic community. The species is so excited to join that they agree to almost any terms." Marcus nodded. He remembered learning about first contact in school. Humanity had been thrilled to discover they weren't alone in the universe. "Stage 2 is integration," Lyra continued. "They ask for small things at first. Military assistance with peacekeeping operations, administrative cooperation, cultural exchange programs. The species thinks they're becoming important partners." "That sounds like what happened with us," Marcus admitted. "Stage 3 is dependency. By now, the species is so reliant on Federation technology and trade that they can't imagine life without it. Their economy is completely integrated into Federation systems. Their military is deployed far from home. Their brightest minds are working for Federation interests instead of their own." Marcus thought about Earth's economy. Almost everything now relied on Federation technology or trade relationships. Even his mining operation existed only because the Federation needed the materials. "What's stage 4? He asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. "Pretext," Lyra said. "Something happens to justify direct intervention. A rebellion that needs to be suppressed. A government that becomes unstable and requires Federation guidance. A threat that only Federation forces can handle. And stage 5? Harvest. The species is officially absorbed into the Federation as voluntary workers. Their homeworld becomes a protectorate. Their people are distributed throughout Federation space as laborers. They're told it's for their own good, for the greater good of galactic peace and prosperity." Marcus felt sick. "How long does the whole process usually take?" "For my people, it took 87 years from first contact to complete absorption. For the Centauri, it was 93 years. The Corax took only 64 years because they were more trusting." Marcus did quick math in his head. Humanity had been part of the Federation for 53 years. "You think we're in stage 3, he said. "I know you are. The signs are identical. Your military is scattered across dozens of Federation missions. Your government makes no major decisions without Federation approval. Your economy would collapse if the trade agreements ended tomorrow. Your people have been conditioned to see Federation membership as the greatest achievement in human history." "But you could be wrong," Marcus said desperately. "Maybe humanity is different. Maybe we really are partners." Lyra's purple eyes filled with something that might have been pity. "My people said the same thing, right up until the day the Federation fleet arrived to help us deal with a manufactured crisis. By then, our own military was too scattered to defend us, and our government was too dependent to resist." She stood up from the table and walked to the window. looking out at the alien landscape of Proxima Beta. "There is one difference with humanity," she said quietly. "What's that?" "Every other species the Federation harvested was pacifistic by nature. We were scientists and philosophers. The Centauri were artists and musicians. The Orcs were farmers and builders. None of us had the cultural memory of large-scale warfare." Lyra turned back to Marcus, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something like hope in her eyes. "But humans are different. You're warriors. You've been fighting each other for millennia. You understand conflict in ways we never did. You might be the first species that could actually fight back." Marcus stared at her, his mind racing. Everything she was saying made a terrible kind of sense, but the implications were staggering. "Even if you're right," he said, "what could we possibly do about it? The Federation has technology centuries ahead of ours. They have ships that could glass Earth in hours." "Maybe," Lyra said, "but they've never faced a species that fought back. They've never had to deal with humans who knew what was coming and had time to prepare." She moved closer to Marcus, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "That's why I needed to tell you this. That's why I risked everything to avoid the neural collar, because somewhere out there are humans who need to know the truth. People who can spread the word. People who can start preparing." Marcus looked into her eyes and saw the weight of her entire species' tragedy, but he also saw determination and the spark of something he'd thought was impossible. Hope for revenge. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, Lyra's words echoing in his mind. Part of him wanted to dismiss her story as the desperate fantasies of a traumatized refugee. But the more he thought about it, the more pieces started falling into place. The next morning, he found Lyra in the geology lab with Dr. Kim. They had spent the night analyzing the seismic data from the northeastern section, and the preliminary drill samples confirmed Lyra's prediction. The crystal vein she'd identified would triple their monthly output. "This is incredible," Dr. Kim was saying as Marcus walked in. "The geological formations here are almost identical to deposits on her homeworld. She's been able to map our entire mine system just by looking at the data." "Where is her homeworld?" Marcus asked. Lyra looked up from the tablet she'd been studying. "Corellios was in the Andromeda sector. Past tense. It's now called Federation Mining Facility K7. Dr. Kim's excitement faded. They renamed your entire planet? After they depleted the easily accessible resources and relocated most of my people to work more dangerous extraction sites," Lyra said matter-of-factly. "The planet still exists. About 50,000 Corellians remain there as maintenance workers. The rest of us are scattered across the galaxy." Marcus felt anger building in his chest. "How many of your people were there originally?" "Approximately 12 billion. The lab fell silent. Dr. Kim's hands trembled as she set down her tablet. "What happened to them?" She whispered. "Working accidents. Workplace diseases, despair." Lyra's voice remained calm, but Marcus could see the pain in her eyes. When you take away someone's home, their culture, their purpose, they don't always want to keep living. The Federation doesn't consider this a problem. There are always more workers available. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Lyra, I want you to tell me everything you know about the Federation's operations. Every detail, every pattern. I need to understand exactly how this process works." Over the following weeks, Lyra became Marcus's unofficial teacher in the true nature of the galactic economy. She explained how the Federation identified target species, how they approached first contact, how they gradually increased dependency. "They're very patient," she explained one evening as they worked late in Marcus's office. "They think in centuries, not years. Each step of the process is carefully designed to seem beneficial to the target species." Marcus had been researching human integration into the Federation, and what he found disturbed him deeply. Earth's military was indeed scattered across dozens of systems, always fighting someone else's conflicts. Human scientists and engineers were working on Federation projects instead of advancing human technology. Earth's economy was so dependent on Federation trade that any disruption would cause global collapse. "Look at this," he said, showing Lyra his research. 40% of Earth's energy now comes from Federation fusion reactors. 60% of our food production relies on Federation agricultural technology. If they cut us off tomorrow, billions would die. "That's the point," Lyra replied. "By the time the harvest begins, the target species is so dependent that resistance seems impossible." Why fight the people who keep you alive? Marcus had also been quietly investigating the other species working at his mining operation. What he learned made his blood boil. Every single one had a story similar to Lyra's. The Centauri had been master artists and architects before becoming construction workers. The Orcs had been peaceful farmers before being forced into hazardous mining operations. Each species had been systematically stripped of their identity and dignity. "There's something else," Lyra said one night as they walked through the mining compound. "Something I haven't told you yet." Marcus looked at her. They had grown close over the past month. Not romantically. The species barriers and the circumstances made that impossible, but with a deep respect and trust that Marcus had never experienced before. "What is it?" "The Federation isn't just harvesting labor. They're harvesting genetic material. Each species they absorb adds to their biological database. They're studying what makes each species unique, cataloging genetic advantages." Marcus stopped walking. "Why?" "I don't know for certain, but I suspect they're building something. Some kind of hybrid species that combines the best traits from every civilization they've conquered. The Corellian ability to work in any environment. The Centauri capacity for complex mathematics. The Korak intuitive engineering skills. Human combat instincts." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. They're not just enslaving us. They're studying us to create something better. A perfect species to serve as their ultimate workforce, or their ultimate weapon. Marcus felt rage building inside him unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The Federation wasn't just stealing humanity's future. They were planning to use human DNA to create their own improved version of what humanity could have become. "I have to warn Earth," he said. "How?" "All communications go through Federation relays. All shipping is monitored. Even if you could get a message through, who would believe you? And what could they do about it?" Marcus thought about this problem for days. Finally, he came up with a plan that was so dangerous, it might actually work. "The next supply ship from Earth arrives in 3 weeks, he told Lyra. "Captain Rodriguez has been running supplies to this operation for 5 years. He's a good man, and he doesn't like the Federation any more than I do. You're going to trust him with this information? I'm going to give him proof." Marcus pulled out his personal data pad and showed Lyra what he'd been working on. "I've been documenting everything you've told me. The patterns, the timeline, the evidence of what happened to other species. But more importantly, I've been gathering data on Federation operations throughout this sector." Lyra looked at the files Marcus had compiled. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through the information. "Marcus, if they find out you have this, they'll kill me, I know, but someone has to take the risk." The data Marcus had gathered painted a clear picture of Federation activities that Earth's government had never been told about. Mining operations on 100 worlds using enslaved populations, military actions against species that posed no threat to anyone, economic manipulation designed to create dependency and prevent resistance. "This is enough to prove everything I've told you," Lyra said. "But even if Captain Rodriguez gets this information to Earth, the Federation will deny it all. They'll say it's propaganda from discontented workers. That's why I need more than just documents," Marcus replied. "I need witnesses. I need people who can testify to what they've seen." Marcus spent the next 2 weeks carefully approaching the other alien workers at the mining operation. He started with the older ones, the ones who had lived through their species' initial contact with the Federation. One by one, he convinced them to record their stories. The Centauri elder named Thule had been a master architect who designed the crystal spires of his homeworld's capital city. Now he operated drilling equipment in dangerous mine shafts. He recorded his testimony with quiet dignity, describing how the Federation had promised to preserve Centauri culture while systematically dismantling it. Crick, an elderly Korak, had been a master engineer who designed sustainable farming systems for his people's agricultural society. The Federation had relocated him to work on industrial mining equipment, claiming his skills were needed for the greater good. His testimony was filled with technical details that proved the Federation's lies about voluntary worker programs. Each recording was a piece of the larger puzzle. Together they painted an undeniable picture of systematic exploitation and cultural genocide. "You're taking an enormous risk," Lyra warned him the night before Captain Rodriguez was scheduled to arrive. "If the Federation discovers what you're doing, then they'll have proven your point," Marcus replied. "A true partnership doesn't require secrecy or fear. If I can't investigate the Federation's actions without being afraid for my life, then we're not partners at all. Marcus had prepared multiple copies of all the evidence, hidden in different parts of the mining operation. He'd also written a detailed letter to his sister back on Earth, explaining everything and asking her to contact specific members of Earth's government who might be willing to listen. The next morning, as Captain Rodriguez's ship appeared on the horizon, Marcus felt the weight of his entire species' future pressing down on him. He was about to commit what the Federation would consider treason. But if Lyra was right, he was actually committing the first act of humanity's resistance. Whatever happens, he told Lyra as they watched the ship land, I want you to know that meeting you changed everything for me. You've shown me what courage really looks like. Lyra smiled, and for the first time since he'd met her, the expression reached her eyes. Humans have more courage than you realize, Marcus. You just needed someone to help you remember it. As Captain Rodriguez's shuttle touched down in the compound's landing bay, Marcus walked forward to meet humanity's first messenger of revolution. Captain Elena Rodriguez stepped off her shuttle with the practiced ease of someone who had been running supply routes for decades. She was a weathered woman in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. Marcus had always respected her straightforward manner and her obvious distrust of Federation bureaucracy. Marcus, she called out as she approached. You look like hell. This mining operation wearing you down? Something like that, Marcus replied. Elena, I need to talk to you privately. It's important. Elena's expression shifted as she caught the urgency in his voice. Everything okay? The company having problems with the operation? Not exactly. Can we talk in my office after you've finished the supply transfer? The unloading process took 3 hours. Marcus watched nervously as Elena's crew transferred equipment, food supplies, and medical provisions to the mining operations storage facilities. Everything was standard procedure, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Lyra had remained out of sight during the shuttle's arrival. Uncollared aliens attracted unwanted attention from Federation sympathizers, and Captain Rodriguez didn't know about Marcus's new consultant yet. When the transfer was complete, Elena followed Marcus to his office. He had prepared carefully for this conversation, but he still wasn't sure how to begin. Elena, how long have you known me? He asked as he sealed the door behind them. About 5 years. You've always been straight with me, Marcus. Paid on time, treated my crew well. What's this about? Marcus took a deep breath. I'm about to tell you something that sounds completely insane. I need you to hear me out before you decide I've lost my mind. Elena raised an eyebrow but nodded. Okay, shoot. Marcus spent the next hour explaining everything Lyra had told him about the Federation's harvesting process. He showed Elena the evidence he'd gathered, the testimonies from the alien workers, and the patterns he'd identified in Federation behavior. Elena listened without interruption, but Marcus could see the skepticism growing on her face as he talked. Marcus, she said when he finished, this is a lot to process. You're essentially telling me that everything we've believed about the Federation for 50 years has been a lie. I know how it sounds, but look at the evidence. Elena examined the data files and video testimonies Marcus had compiled. As she watched Thule describe the systematic destruction of Centauri architecture and Crick detail the Federation's false promises to his people, her skepticism began to fade. These stories, she said quietly, they're too detailed to be fabricated. Too consistent across different species. Exactly. And the timeline matches perfectly with what happened to humanity. We're following the same pattern that led to the absorption of every other species in that slave market. Elena was quiet for a long moment, processing what she'd learned. Finally, she looked up at Marcus with a grim expression. If this is true, then we're all in serious trouble. Earth's government would need years to prepare any kind of resistance, and you're saying we might not have that long. That's not the worst part, Marcus said. He pulled up another file on his datapad. There's something else Lyra told me that I haven't included in the evidence package yet. Something about genetic harvesting. Elena leaned forward as Marcus explained the Federation's apparent interest in collecting and studying the DNA of conquered species. They're not just enslaving civilizations, he concluded. They're building a catalog of genetic traits from across the galaxy. And humans. Humans have something they want specifically. Our capacity for warfare, Elena said, understanding immediately. Among other things, our adaptability, our aggressive instincts, our ability to fight even when defeat seems certain. Lyra thinks they want to create some kind of hybrid species that combines human combat abilities with other species' specialized skills. Elena stood up and paced to the window, staring out at the mining operation. You realize what you're asking me to do? If I take this information to Earth and you're wrong, it could cause a panic that destroys the Human-Federation relationship. And if you don't take it and we're right, there won't be any humans left to have relationships with anyone. Elena turned back to him. How do I know I can trust this Corellian? How do I know this isn't some kind of elaborate deception? Marcus had been expecting this question. Because she asked me not to put a neural collar on her, and when I refused, she could have escaped. She chose to stay here and help me gather evidence. What possible motive could she have for lying about something this massive? Before Elena could answer, Marcus's communication console chimed with an incoming message. He activated the display and found himself looking at a Federation official he didn't recognize. A tall, pale being with too many joints in his arms and cold, dark eyes. Mining Operator Chen, the official said in a voice like grinding metal. This is Administrator Kelthax of Federation Compliance Division. We have detected irregularities in your operation that require immediate investigation. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized personnel documentation, unregistered communication activities, suspicious data transfers. The administrator's dark eyes seemed to look directly at Marcus through the screen. A Federation inspection team will arrive at your facility within 6 standard hours to conduct a full audit of your operation and all personnel. The transmission ended, leaving Marcus and Elena staring at the blank screen. That can't be a coincidence, Elena said quietly. Marcus's mind raced. A full audit meant they would examine every file, every communication, every worker. They would discover the evidence he'd gathered and the testimonies he'd recorded. Worse, they would find Lyra without a neural collar and demand to know why. I need to get that evidence to you now, he said, moving to his secure storage compartment. Marcus, if they're already suspicious, taking that information off-world could make things worse for both of us. And if I don't, they'll bury it along with everyone who knows the truth. Marcus pulled out a small storage device containing everything he'd compiled over the past month. As he handed it to Elena, the magnitude of what they were doing hit him fully. This contains testimony from a dozen different species about Federation harvesting operations, he said. Documentation of systematic enslavement and cultural genocide. Proof that humanity is following the same path as every other species they've absorbed. Elena took the device with hands that trembled slightly. If I do this, there's no going back. The Federation will know the information came from here. They probably already know. The question is whether we're going to let them silence us without a fight. Elena pocketed the storage device. What about you? And your consultant? They're not going to let either of you live once they realize what you've discovered. Marcus had been thinking about this problem since the administrator's message arrived. I've got a plan, but it's going to require some help from your crew. Over the next hour, Marcus and Elena worked out the details of a desperate escape plan. Elena would take off on schedule, claiming routine departure for the next supply stop. But her ship would actually rendezvous with a small asteroid field, about 6 hours away from Proxima Beta, where they would wait for Marcus and Lyra. Meanwhile, Marcus would use the mining operations emergency protocols to create a distraction. A controlled explosion in one of the exhausted mine shafts would simulate a major accident and require immediate evacuation of all personnel. In the chaos, Marcus and Lyra would escape in one of the smaller mining shuttles. This plan has about a dozen ways it could go wrong, Elena pointed out. But it's the only chance we have. If I stay here when that inspection team arrives, they'll never let me leave. And if they get their hands on Lyra... Marcus didn't need to finish the sentence. Both of them knew what happened to aliens who caused trouble for the Federation. As Elena prepared to return to her ship, Marcus caught her arm. Elena, when you get to Earth, you need to contact specific people, not the official government channels. The Federation monitors those. Find General Harrison at Strategic Command. Find Senator Martinez from the Defense Committee. Find Dr. Sarah Webb at the Institute for Advanced Physics. These are people who might be willing to listen. Elena nodded. What about your family? They'll want to know what happened to you. Marcus thought about his sister, his elderly parents, the life he was leaving behind on Earth. Tell them the truth. Tell them I found something that could save humanity, and I chose to act on it. As Elena headed toward the door, she turned back one last time. Marcus, if this information is real, if the Federation really is planning to harvest humanity, what chance do we have? They're centuries ahead of us technologically, Marcus smiled grimly. Lyra says they've never faced a species that knew what was coming and had time to prepare. They've never dealt with humans who were ready for a fight. You really think we can win? I think we can make them regret trying to put us in chains. Elena left to return to her ship, and Marcus began preparing for what might be the last few hours of his life as a law-abiding Federation citizen. In 6 hours, he would either be dead or he would be a fugitive carrying the most dangerous information in human history. Either way, the revolution had officially begun. Marcus watched Elena's ship disappear into the star-filled darkness of space, knowing he had just committed an act that would change everything. The storage device containing evidence of the Federation's true nature was now beyond their reach, racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speed. He found Lyra in the geology lab, analyzing mineral samples as if nothing unusual was happening. Her calm demeanor had become one of the things he most admired about her, the ability to function normally. Even when their entire world was about to collapse, the inspection team will be here in 5 hours, he told her quietly. She didn't look up from her microscope. Then we need to leave in 4. Marcus had spent the past hour making subtle preparations for their escape. He'd transferred critical mining operation data to secure servers, sent coded messages to his most trusted human workers about emergency procedures, and quietly gathered supplies they would need for their journey. Most importantly, he'd programmed a controlled explosion in Mine Shaft 3 that would create enough chaos to cover their departure. The shaft was nearly exhausted anyway, and the blast would simulate the kind of accident that required immediate evacuation protocols. There's something I need to tell you, Lyra said, finally looking up from her work. Something about why the Federation is particularly interested in humans. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? I've been analyzing the mineral compositions here and comparing them to other worlds where I've worked. The Federation isn't just harvesting species for genetic material. They're positioning humans in specific locations throughout the galaxy. She pulled up a star map on her tablet, showing the locations of various human settlements and mining operations. Look at the pattern, she said. Every major human presence is located near strategic wormhole junctions or resource-rich systems. You're not just being prepared for harvest, you're being positioned for conquest. Marcus studied the map, and the truth hit him like a physical blow. Human settlements formed a perfect network of strategic positions throughout this entire sector of the galaxy. They're planning to use us as a military force, he said. More than that, they're planning to use human aggression and tactical thinking to expand Federation territory into sectors they've never been able to control, species that have successfully resisted Federation expansion for centuries. Marcus understood the full scope of the plan now. The Federation wasn't just going to enslave humanity, they were going to turn humans into their perfect weapon for galactic conquest. That's why they've been scattering our military across so many different missions, he realized. They're training us for large-scale warfare while making sure we never learn to work together as a unified force. Exactly. By the time the harvest begins, human military leaders will be isolated from each other and dependent on Federation command structures. They'll be turned into generals for a slave army. The thought of human soldiers being used to enslave other species made Marcus feel physically sick, but it also crystallized his determination to stop it. We need to add this to the evidence package, he said. I already have. I created a supplementary file with all the strategic analysis and transmitted it to Captain Rodriguez's ship before she left. Marcus stared at Lyra with new respect. While he'd been focused on the immediate crisis, she'd been thinking several steps ahead. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you refused to put a collar on me. I knew eventually we'd need to run, and when we did, Earth would need every piece of information we could provide. Marcus activated his communications console and sent out a coded signal to all mining personnel. It was supposedly a routine shift change notification, but his human workers would recognize it as the emergency evacuation signal they'd discussed in private. Within minutes, Marcus could see his human staff members quietly moving toward predetermined positions throughout the compound. They didn't know the full truth about what was happening, But they trusted Marcus enough to follow his instructions when he said their lives might depend on it. T-minus 2 hours until the controlled explosion, Marcus announced. Lyra nodded and began gathering her research materials. Marcus, there's one more thing you should know about my people's resistance efforts. I thought you said the Corellians couldn't fight back. We couldn't fight in the way humans understand fighting, but that doesn't mean we didn't resist. We've been working for decades to document Federation crimes, to preserve the histories of conquered species, to maintain communication networks between scattered survivors. Lyra pulled out a small device Marcus had never seen before. It looked like a standard data pad, but the interface was covered in symbols he didn't recognize. This contains the real history of the past 3 centuries, she said. Stories from hundreds of conquered worlds. Evidence of Federation atrocities that they thought had been buried forever. Communication protocols for resistance networks throughout the galaxy. Marcus realized that Lyra hadn't just been a random purchase at a slave market. She'd been a deliberate choice. Someone who could provide him with access to the galaxy's hidden resistance movement. How many others are there? How many conquered species are still fighting back? More than the Federation realizes. We've learned to be very careful, very patient. But we've been waiting for the right moment, the right catalyst to coordinate a larger resistance effort. And you think humanity could be that catalyst? I think humans might be the first species strong enough to fight the Federation directly, instead of just documenting their crimes. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Marcus programmed the mining explosives with careful precision, enough damage to create chaos and justify evacuation, but not enough to actually harm any of his workers. Lyra prepared emergency supplies and loaded critical data onto portable storage devices. As the countdown approached its final minutes, Marcus gathered his human staff in the main conference room. Jake Morrison, Dr. Sarah Kim, and a dozen other faces he'd worked with for years looked at him expectantly. I can't tell you everything that's happening, Marcus began, but I can tell you that your lives may be in danger from the Federation inspection team that's coming. When the evacuation alarm sounds, I want you to follow emergency protocols exactly. Get to the escape pods and head for the nearest human settlement. Jake frowned. Boss, what aren't you telling us? What's really going on? Marcus looked around the room at people who had become like family to him over the years. They deserved to know the truth, but telling them would put them in even greater danger. The Federation isn't what we thought it was, he said simply. Someone needs to warn Earth, and that someone is me. If I don't make it back, tell people that Marcus Chen discovered something that changed everything. Dr. Kim stepped forward. Marcus, if this is really that serious, why don't you take all of us with you? Because Earth needs witnesses who can confirm that this information came from legitimate sources. You're not fugitives. You're employees who were evacuated during a mining accident. That gives you credibility I'll never have again. Marcus activated the mining charges remotely. Deep underground, controlled explosions rocked Mineshaft 3, sending vibrations through the entire compound. Immediately, emergency alarms began wailing and automated evacuation protocols activated. In the chaos that followed, Marcus and Lyra slipped away from the main group and headed for the small mining shuttle they'd prepared for their escape. The shuttle was designed for short-range cargo transport, but Marcus had modified its engines and life support systems for a longer journey. As they climbed into the shuttle, Marcus took one last look at the mining compound that had been his home for 5 years. He was leaving behind everything familiar, everything safe, everything predictable about his life. No regrets? Lyra asked as she settled into the co-pilot's seat. Marcus fired up the shuttle's engines and lifted, off into the thin atmosphere of Proxima, Beta. Only that it took me this long to understand what was really happening. As they broke through the planet's atmosphere and entered open space, Marcus could see the evacuation pods from the mining operation, scattering in different directions. His people were safe, at least for now. Where are we heading? Lyra asked. Captain Rodriguez is waiting for us in the Kepler asteroid field. From there, we follow your resistance network to find other humans who are ready to hear the truth. Lyra activated her hidden communication device and began transmitting coded signals into space. Within minutes, she was receiving responses from locations scattered across the galaxy. Marcus, she said, her voice filled with excitement. The resistance has been busier than I thought. There are human settlements throughout this sector, where people have been asking questions about Federation activities. Workers who've noticed the same patterns you did. Military personnel who've become suspicious about their deployment orders. How many? Hundreds. Maybe thousands, all waiting for someone to connect the pieces and tell them what's really happening. Marcus felt a surge of hope, unlike anything he'd experienced since this whole nightmare began. Humanity wasn't defenseless. They weren't walking blindly into slavery. Somewhere out there, other humans had been paying attention and preparing. The rendezvous with Captain Rodriguez went smoothly. Her cargo ship, the Earth's Promise, was old but reliable, with modifications that allowed for extended deep space travel. More importantly, Elena had spent the journey analyzing the evidence Marcus had provided, and her initial skepticism had transformed into grim determination. "I've been running supply routes for 20 years, she told Marcus and Lyra as they transferred to her ship. "I've seen things that didn't make sense at the time, but now they're starting to form a pattern." Elena led them to her ship's small conference room, where she'd laid out navigation charts and shipping manifests from dozens of different human operations. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of red marks on the star chart. "Every human military deployment for the past 5 years has been to systems that just happen to be on the borders of unconquered territories. The Federation has been using our soldiers as a probe force to test the defenses of species they haven't absorbed yet." Marcus studied the charts with growing anger. Human blood had been spilled to advance Federation expansion plans, and Earth's government had no idea they were being used. "It gets worse," Elena continued. "I've been tracking cargo manifests for human settlements throughout this sector. Guess what they've all been receiving large shipments of recently?" "Neural collars," Lyra said quietly. "Millions of them. Far more than they could possibly need for their current alien workforces, unless they're planning to collar a lot more people very soon." The three of them stood in silence, absorbing the implications. The Federation wasn't just planning to harvest humanity. They were already positioning the infrastructure to do it. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked. Lyra consulted her hidden communication device, which had been receiving status updates from resistance networks throughout the galaxy. "Based on the pattern from other species and the recent acceleration of Federation activities, I estimate 18 months, maybe 2 years if we're lucky." "That's not enough time to evacuate Earth or build adequate defenses," Elena said. "No," Marcus replied, "but it might be enough time to organize a resistance that could hit them before they're ready." Over the next several days, as Elena's ship traveled through hyperspace toward their first resistance contact, Marcus learned more about the scope of the galactic underground movement than he'd ever imagined possible. The resistance network that Lyra belonged to wasn't just Corellians. Survivors from dozens of conquered species had been quietly communicating for decades, sharing information, preserving their cultures, and waiting for the opportunity to strike back. The Federation's strength has always been their ability to isolate each species during the harvesting process, Lyra explained as she showed Marcus the resistance communication protocols. "They make each conquest seem inevitable, unavoidable. But they've never faced a coordinated resistance from multiple species working together. Why haven't you tried coordinated resistance before?" "Because none of the conquered species had the military capacity to threaten Federation infrastructure directly. We could document crimes, preserve information, help individuals escape, but we couldn't mount an actual military challenge. But humans can. Humans are the first warrior species the Federation has tried to harvest. Your people have been fighting large-scale wars for millennia. You understand strategy, logistics, combined arms operations, things that my people never learned." Their first contact was at a human mining station in the Tau Ceti system. The station commander, Colonel Jennifer Walsh, was a former Earth military officer who had been asking uncomfortable questions about Federation activities for months. When Elena's ship docked at the station, Colonel Walsh was waiting for them personally, an unusual honor that suggested she understood the importance of their arrival. "Chen," she said, greeting Marcus with a firm handshake. "Captain Rodriguez transmitted your preliminary data during the approach. If even half of what you've documented is true, we're in serious trouble." Colonel Walsh led them to a secure conference room deep within the station. Marcus was surprised to find they weren't alone. 5 other humans were waiting for them, representing mining operations and research facilities throughout the sector. "How did you know to gather them?" Marcus asked. "Because I've been building a network of my own for the past 6 months, Walsh replied. "People who've noticed discrepancies in Federation activities. People who've been asking questions they weren't supposed to ask. Dr. Amanda Foster, a xenobiologist from a nearby research station, leaned forward. Marcus, we've all seen pieces of what you're describing, but none of us had the full picture. Your evidence fills in gaps we've been trying to understand for months. Marcus spent the next several hours presenting his evidence to the group while Lyra provided context from her knowledge of the Federation's historical patterns. The reaction was exactly what he'd hoped for. Initial shock followed by determined anger. The question is, what do we do about it? Asked Commander Liu from the Vega mining operation. Even if we can warn Earth, they're not equipped to fight a galactic empire. That's where the broader resistance network comes in, Lyra said, activating her communication device. I'd like to introduce you to some friends. The device projected holographic images of beings Marcus didn't recognize. A tall, crystalline creature that sparkled with internal light. A massive bear-like alien with 6 arms. A graceful aquatic species with translucent skin. These are the survivors, Lyra explained. Representatives of species the Federation thought they had completely conquered. They've been waiting decades for the opportunity to fight back. The crystalline being spoke first. Its voice like music played through wind chimes. I am Zenth of the Luminar. My people were harvested 60 years ago. But thousands of us survive in hidden enclaves throughout the galaxy. We have maintained our technology and our will to resist. The bear-like creature growled a greeting. I am Granak of the Barathi. My people were warriors like yours, but we were caught unprepared. We will not make that mistake again. One by one, the representatives of conquered species shared their stories and their resources. Marcus realized that the Federation had created their own worst enemy by scattering survivors throughout the galaxy, while assuming they were broken and helpless. What kind of resources are we talking about? Colonel Walsh asked. Zenth answered first. The Luminar have maintained hidden manufacturing facilities capable of producing advanced weapons and shield technology. We have been preparing for this opportunity for 6 decades. The Barathi have warriors trained in guerrilla tactics and sabotage, Granak added. We know the locations of critical Federation infrastructure throughout this entire sector. Lyra smiled. And the Corellians have something even more valuable. Detailed intelligence on Federation military capabilities, administrative structures, and the location of every major harvesting facility in the galaxy. Marcus felt excitement building in his chest. This wasn't just a desperate attempt to warn Earth about an unstoppable threat. This was the beginning of a coordinated military campaign that could actually succeed. What's the plan? He asked. Colonel Walsh spread a tactical display across the conference table. Phase 1 is communication. We need to warn every human settlement in this sector and beyond. Create a network that can coordinate resistance activities without relying on Federation infrastructure. Phase 2 is sabotage, Commander Liu added. Hit Federation supply lines, communication relays, and administrative centers. Make it impossible for them to coordinate their harvesting operations. Phase 3 is direct military action, Dr. Foster said. Once Earth has been warned and had time to prepare, we launch coordinated strikes against Federation fleet bases and command centers. Lyra consulted with the resistance representatives through her device. The other species are ready to coordinate their efforts with human resistance activities. We can provide intelligence, technology, and warriors for joint operations. How many ships can the resistance put together? Helena asked. More than the Federation expects, Zenth replied. They have been treating us as defeated populations for so long that they've stopped monitoring our activities carefully. We have rebuilt more than they realize. Marcus looked around the table at the faces of people who had been strangers a few hours ago but were now partners in humanity's first interstellar revolution. When do we start? He asked. Colonel Walsh activated a galaxy-wide communication array. Right now. It's time to wake up humanity. As coded messages began transmitting to human settlements throughout the galaxy, Marcus realized that his purchase of a single Corellian consultant had started something that would reshape the entire galactic order. The Federation had made a critical error in judgment. They had assumed that humans could be managed like every other species they'd conquered, but they had never dealt with a species that got more dangerous the angrier they became. And humanity was about to get very, very angry.